Like me, most of us don't really question what's on our plate. We eat it, enjoy it, and move on. But some meals, like these cases, come with deadly consequences. From a man who ignored a warning and ate bat soup to another who misunderstood a single word in a food blog and paid for it in the worst way possible. It was October 17th, 2019. A small riverside food stall in rural Indonesia. The kind of place that does not appear on any list but gets passed between people who spend time looking for food that has not been written about yet. Ravi Menon was 43. He worked as a food writer based in Chennai and had built a reputation over years of traveling to places most food journalists did not bother with. He wrote about preparation methods, about the people behind the food, about what a dish meant in the context of the place it came from. Fruit bat soup had been on his list for some time. He had watched preparation videos before the trip, read what he could find, and arrived in Indonesia having already decided he would eat it. The decision was made before he got there. He had eaten unusual food across multiple countries and had never been seriously ill from any of it. That record had become its own kind of reassurance. He was not careless about food safety in general, but he had developed a quiet confidence in his own resilience that had grown with each trip that ended without incident. The eating, in his experience, had never been the problem. At the stall, he asked to be involved in the preparation. The cook discouraged it at first. Ravi pressed. He wanted the full experience, the handling, the process, not just the finished bowl. He saw it as the difference between observing a culture and participating in it. The cook agreed. Ravi handled the raw bat with bare hands. The cook said no first. That detail matters to me because this is the part that changes everything. He had a healing cut on his right index finger. It had been closing for a few days, but it reopened during the handling. The contact between the raw tissue and fluids of the bat and the broken skin on his finger was direct and sustained. Fruit bats across parts of South and Southeast Asia are known carriers of zoonotic pathogens, including viruses capable of crossing into humans through exactly that kind of exposure. The soup itself, properly cooked, carries a lower risk. The handling was a different matter, and Ravi did not know enough to treat it differently. He ate the soup and left. He felt fine. Within a week, a fever developed. He attributed it to the environment, to the heat, to something minor picked up along the way. Travelers get fevers. He had gotten them before. He waited. The fever did not ease. A severe headache followed, and then a creeping confusion that was harder to dismiss. He could not keep food down. He found a local clinic and was treated empirically for malaria or a bacterial infection. The clinic had no advanced viral diagnostic capability. The treatment did not work because it was not addressing what was actually wrong. He flew back to Chennai. By the time he was admitted to hospital, the infection had already advanced significantly. Neurological symptoms consistent with viral encephalitis were present and progressing. Over the days that followed, his level of consciousness declined. He became increasingly disoriented and difficult to rouse. There were episodes where he could not respond coherently to the clinical team. He was moved to intensive care as his condition worsened and his ability to maintain basic functions deteriorated. The clinical team worked to identify the cause, but the etiology could not be confirmed with the diagnostic resources and timeline available. The window for effective intervention had passed during the days the illness had gone unrecognized. Ravi Menon died in hospital. The diagnosis recorded was acute viral encephalitis with suspected zoonotic exposure history. The primary exposure pathway was identified as direct contact with raw bat tissue through compromised skin during food preparation. Ingestion was considered a secondary possibility, but assessed as less likely given the cooking conditions. His family was notified. The dish was low risk. The handling was not understood. He spent years building a career around eating things nobody else would. He pressed the cook until he said yes. He had a cut on his finger he probably forgot about. The soup was fine. The handling was what killed him, and the cook had tried to tell him no. The next case I want to cover took a completely different route. A grandma wanting to prepare a special meal for her family overlooked one simple rule. It was July 6th, 2014, London, England, a Sunday morning in South London. The streets were quiet, and the curtains were still drawn on most of the houses along the road. Inside, the smell of coconut oil and saltfish had already filled the kitchen before 7 in the morning. Gloria Stevens was 67. She was retired, and had spent most of her adult life in London after coming over from Jamaica as a young woman in her 20s. She had built a life here, raised children here, buried her husband here, and through all of it, the kitchen had been the one constant. She was the kind of grandmother who expressed everything through food. Birthdays, funerals, first days of school, reunions, all of it went through her kitchen. Her ackee and saltfish was the thing people asked for by name. She had been making it for decades, and she knew the process the way she knew her own hands. She had never once had a problem with it, and that right there is the part I keep returning to. It's the fact that she had never had a problem preparing that dish. The family arriving that morning was the first visit in several months. There had been distance, the kind that builds quietly between people who are busy and well-meaning and not as present as they intend to be. A few missed calls, a few rescheduled plans. Nothing dramatic, just life pulling people in separate directions. Gloria had been looking forward to this morning more than she had said out loud. She wanted it to feel like it used to. She had the table set before anyone arrived and the food well underway. The kitchen had two sources of ackee that morning. The canned ackee she used regularly, safe and ready to go, and a bowl of fresh ackee that had been brought over recently by a family member. Gloria did not inspect the fresh ackee before using it. She had cooked with fresh ackee her whole life, and the inspection was never something she skipped. Not once. You checked that the pods had split open on their own while still on the tree. You checked that the yellow arils were clean and separated. You removed every seed and every trace of the pink membrane before anything went near heat. It was not a precaution she had learned from a book. It was something passed down, practiced so many times it had become part of the physical rhythm of making the dish. Her hands knew the steps, the way her feet knew the stairs in her own house. That morning, the bowl was on the counter, and the clock was moving, and the family was due, and she reached in and kept going. The check did not happen. After 40 years of never skipping it, that morning she did. The breakfast was prepared, plated, and brought to the table. The family sat down together and ate. It was the kind of meal she had been making her whole life, and it tasted the way it always tasted. Within a few hours, the nausea started. Gloria put it down to the morning, to having eaten too quickly, to the heat in the kitchen. The others at the table felt mildly unwell too, but their symptoms were light and passed without much concern. Gloria's did not pass. The weakness came next, and then a confusion that she tried to push through, continuing to move around the kitchen, tidying, keeping herself upright and present the way she always was when family was there. By the time she collapsed, the family had already begun to understand that something was seriously wrong. This is where things took a turn I was not prepared for when I first read this case. She was taken to hospital. The connection to the ackee was not made immediately, and the cause of her deteriorating condition took time to identify. Her blood glucose was critically low on arrival. An IV dextrose infusion was started, and she stabilized briefly, enough to give the team a window to work. But the stabilization did not hold. Unripe ackee contains hypoglycin A, a toxin that disrupts the body's ability to maintain blood sugar and process fatty acids. It is not removed by cooking. The pods that had not opened naturally on the tree were not ready regardless of how long they spent in the pan. Gloria did not check. By the time Jamaican vomiting sickness was confirmed and traced to the unripe fresh ackee, the neurological deterioration was already advanced. The hypoglycemia had been running through the critical early hours before anyone understood what was causing it. Treatment continued, but the damage could not be reversed. Gloria Stevens died from the complications of Jamaican vomiting sickness. The canned ackee on the counter was tested and found to be uncontaminated. The fresh ackee in the bowl was the source. Gloria's case was about muscle memory overriding the one check that would have saved her. The next one is harder to explain because the setting should have been safe. The person knew the area well, and the evening had been one of the best of her life. It was August 21st, 2017. Rural Oregon, USA. Late summer, the kind of evening where the light stays long and the air is still warm after the sun goes down. The fence line ran along the edge of dry golden fields, wild growth pushing through the wire in places, the whole stretch unhurried and familiar. Melissa Grant was 34. She taught at a primary school in a small town outside Eugene and had spent most of her life in that part of Oregon. That morning, she had opened her email at school and found out she had been offered her dream job, a position she had applied for twice before and had stopped letting herself hope for. She had walked home in a state she could not quite name, something between disbelief and a happiness she did not know how to hold yet. The evening walk along the fence line was part of how she settled herself after big days. She had been picking and eating small, dark, wild berries along rural paths for years. There were several species that grew along that fence line, and she had eaten from the area casually on previous occasions, without any problem. What she had picked safely before grew near a stretch that also contained deadly nightshade, and the distinction between them had never required her attention because she had never been wrong yet. I want to sit with that sentence for a second. She had never been wrong yet. But what actually happened next gets you questioning that. That evening, she was not paying close attention to which berries she was picking from where. She was in a good mood. She gathered considerably more than she ever had on a previous walk, enough to fill both hands more than once. She ate a substantial amount directly from her palm as she walked, more than any casual handful, and carried the remainder home. What she brought back was enough to fill a small jam jar. She cooked them down that same evening and ate a significant portion of the jam before bed, spreading it across several pieces of bread. The total amount of berries she consumed that night, between what she ate on the walk and what she processed into jam and then ate again, represented a volume that would have been dangerous even to someone who had correctly identified the source. She had not correctly identified the source, and the jam concentrated what the raw berries had started. The first symptoms came in the night: dry mouth, a strange heaviness behind her eyes. Her vision began to blur, and her heart was beating faster than it should have been. She lay in bed and waited for it to pass. It did not pass. The confusion came next, slow at first, and then faster than she could manage. Her thoughts could not find a clear path, and the room began to feel wrong in a way she could not describe. By around 2 in the morning, she was disoriented and speaking about things that were not there. Her housemate heard her and found her in the hallway, pale and unreachable. Paramedics were called. When they arrived, they found Melissa presenting with symptoms consistent with severe anticholinergic toxidrome, rapid heart rate, dilated pupils, confusion, and active hallucinations. She could not give a coherent account of what had happened. The jam jar on the kitchen counter was found during the assessment, and the berries were noted. Deadly nightshade, Atropa belladonna, contains atropine and scopolamine. Both are potent anticholinergic compounds. The berries are small, dark, and glossy, growing individually on the plant in a way that can go unexamined by someone not specifically looking for identifying features. Fatal outcomes in adults are uncommon with casual exposure. They are not uncommon when the volume consumed is high and the toxins have been further concentrated through cooking. But several hours had passed since ingestion, and her condition had been deteriorating through most of them. Her core temperature had risen through the night, and her cardiac rhythm was unstable by the time treatment began in earnest. The presentation included complications that made the intervention more difficult to sustain. Melissa Grant died from complications of anticholinergic toxicity in the early hours of the morning. Subsequent analysis confirmed deadly nightshade as the source. Post-incident findings noted that the fence line location contained multiple berry-producing species growing in close proximity, and that no markers or clearance existed to distinguish edible from toxic plants. It had not hurt her before. That was the reason she trusted it. She had gotten the job she had stopped letting herself want. She made jam before bed. She did not wake up. That is the part of this case I genuinely could not process when I first read it. The worst night of her life started as the best day. Melissa trusted a fence line she had walked 100 times, but in a restaurant in Vietnam, the last night of a trip became the beginning of a fatal end. It was September 22nd, 2018, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, the last evening of a 2-week trip. The city was loud and warm at that hour, motorbikes threading through narrow gaps, the smell of charcoal and fish sauce drifting from open restaurant fronts along the block. The place was busy and well lit, the kind of noise and movement that makes somewhere feel safe when you are far from home. Diane Okafor was 39. She worked as a nurse in Houston and had just completed a demanding postgraduate program that had taken most of her available energy for the better part of 2 years. The Vietnam trip had been planned as a way to close that chapter, something she and her sister had been talking about for a long time. Diane was health conscious by training and by habit. Throughout the 2 weeks, she had stuck to bottled water, cooked food, and had avoided raw produce without making a performance of it. It was simply what she did when she traveled. The restaurant that evening had blood clams on the menu. The travel blog had mentioned them specifically, framed as a local delicacy worth trying. The preparation was described as lightly blanched, which Diane read as cooked. Blood clams in Vietnamese cooking are typically prepared by brief immersion in hot water, enough to open the shells and heat the surface of the meat, but not enough to cook the interior to a temperature that eliminates pathogens. The shells open, the clam looks done. The interior is not. Diane did not know this distinction and had no reason to. She ordered them and ate several. Her sister ate a smaller portion. This is where things became quietly devastating for me. She was a nurse. She had been careful for 14 straight days. She read the word blanched and it registered as safe. That's where everything started. They left Vietnam the following day. Diane felt fine on the flight home and for the days that followed. The hepatitis A virus has an incubation period of several weeks, and the early phase produces no symptoms. She returned to Houston and moved back into her routine. Her sister developed a mild illness about 2 weeks after the trip, managed it at home, and recovered without complication. Diane's symptoms appeared later and differently. The fatigue that developed was heavier than post-travel tiredness and did not lift. Her appetite dropped. Several weeks after returning, she noticed the yellowing at the whites of her eyes. Blood tests confirmed markedly elevated liver enzymes. She was admitted to hospital. Hepatitis A was confirmed and linked to the shellfish exposure. 2 factors made Diane's case different from her sister's and from the majority of hepatitis A presentations in otherwise healthy adults. The first was the quantity she had consumed. Blood clams are filter feeders that concentrate pathogens from surrounding water as they feed, and the clams from that area carried a documented contamination load. Diane had eaten more of them than her sister, and her initial viral burden was substantially higher as a result. The second factor was timing. She had returned to a full working schedule and had not sought medical attention until the jaundice appeared, which was several weeks after the infection had already taken hold. By the time she was admitted, the virus had been progressing without intervention for longer than would have been ideal. In most adults, hepatitis A resolves on its own with supportive care. In a small number of cases, for reasons not fully understood, the immune response becomes excessive and begins attacking liver tissue faster than it can recover. This is called fulminant hepatic failure, and it is rare, but it is more likely when the initial viral load is high and treatment is delayed. Diane was in that group. Her liver enzyme levels continued rising after admission rather than stabilizing. Her clotting function began to deteriorate, a sign that the liver was losing its ability to perform basic metabolic tasks. She was transferred to intensive care within 4 days of admission. Over the following week, her condition was managed with the full range of available supportive interventions. Her bilirubin levels kept climbing. Her mental state began to change as toxins her liver could no longer process accumulated in her bloodstream, a condition called hepatic encephalopathy. She became increasingly disoriented. A transplant assessment was initiated, but her condition progressed faster than the process could move. Her organs began to fail in sequence. Diane Okafor died on October 23, 2018. Post-incident findings noted that blood clams are high-rate filter feeders. They draw water through their bodies continuously and concentrate whatever is present in the surrounding environment, including viruses. Hepatitis A contamination in shellfish from certain coastal and delta regions of Vietnam has been periodically documented. The clams Diane ate that evening carried a viral load consistent with that exposure pathway. The number she consumed meant her initial infection burden was higher than her sister's. She avoided the obvious risks. Her body could not contain the one she could not see. I have to be honest, I almost didn't include this case because nothing she did was wrong. She just didn't know what blanched meant in that kitchen, and that was enough. Diane was undone by a word in a travel blog. The next case is a man who trusted a garden bed he had planted with his own hands. and a detail at the end that I think about more than I should. It was April 14th, 2016, County Cork, Ireland. A spring morning with the kind of light that makes everything in a garden look like it belongs there. The air was cool and carrying the smell of wet soil from overnight rain. The hedgerows along the back boundary were already thick with new growth, and the beds were pushing up green in every direction. It was the kind of morning that made it easy to be outside early. Patrick Howe was 44. He worked as a groundskeeper for a large private estate outside Cork City and kept his own garden at home with the same care he brought to his professional work. Vegetables, herbs, soft fruit. He knew his plot well and had been harvesting from it for years. Wild garlic had been growing in the same border for several seasons, and he had used it regularly in cooking. It came up reliably every spring, and he knew where to find it. What had also been growing in that border, for longer than the wild garlic, was lily of the valley. He had planted it himself years earlier on the opposite end of the same bed. In spring, both plants push up narrow, bright green leaves from the ground at the same time, in similar conditions, at similar heights. I've covered plant mice identification cases before, and most of them involve people who had no business handling wild plants in the first place. Patrick was a professional groundskeeper. He planted both of them himself. That changes everything about how I read this. Without the distinguishing markers, the flower spike of the lily of the valley, or the garlic scent released when a wild garlic leaf is crushed between the fingers, the two are easy to confuse. Patrick knew this in the general sense that experienced gardeners know most things about their plots. He had never confused them before. He had been harvesting from that border long enough that recognition had replaced verification. On the morning of April the 14th, he gathered a handful of leaves from the border and brought them inside. He prepared a salad and ate it at the kitchen table before his wife was up. The leaves he had picked were not wild garlic. He had not checked. He had not crushed a leaf between his fingers to confirm the scent the way a cautious harvester would. He had looked at the leaves, recognized the shape and the location, and assumed. The first symptoms came a few hours after breakfast, nausea and a heaviness in his limbs that he put down to the morning. Then dizziness, a visual disturbance at the edges of his field of vision, a feeling in his chest that was not quite pain, but was not right either. He went outside and sat on the bench in the garden. By the time his wife found him, he was pale and sweating and struggling to describe what was happening. She called emergency services immediately. Patrick was transported to hospital by ambulance. He told the paramedics he had eaten leaves from his garden that morning. The clinical team identified cardiac arrhythmia on arrival, and based on his history and the symptom pattern, lily of the valley ingestion was strongly suspected. Aggressive cardiac management was initiated, including monitoring, electrolyte correction, and rhythm intervention. His condition stabilized partially in the early hours of treatment, enough to suggest the efforts were having some effect. But the stabilization did not hold. His condition deteriorated over the course of the day, despite continued treatment. The cardiac instability persisted and could not be brought under lasting control. Patrick Howe died from complications of plant toxin-induced arrhythmia. Subsequent analysis confirmed lily of the valley as the source. Lily of the valley contains cardiac glycosides, compounds that interfere directly with the electrical activity of the heart. They are present throughout the plant, including the leaves. Cooking does not neutralize them. Patrick had eaten a full salad portion, enough to deliver a significant toxic load. Post-incident findings confirmed that both plants had been intentionally cultivated in the same border and that no error had occurred in the garden setup itself. The failure had occurred at the point of identification. The difference was the smell. He did not check it. One crush of a leaf between his fingers. That is the whole distance between that morning and every other spring morning he had ever harvested from that garden. That detail hasn't left me.